We all go through life accepting what textbooks told us about the universe. But what happens when questions are raised about many of our fundamental beliefs? A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you never imagined possible. Encounters with the Unexplained.
The one technological certainty of the beginning of this new millennium is that today human beings of the planet Earth are a space-traveling species. And whatever doubt there may have been was erased in July of 1969 when the Eagle lander settled into the primordial dust on the surface of the moon.
Incredibly, just a few months prior to this epic event, a unique film debuted, 2001: A Space Odyssey. A film which captured the imagination of the world with a prophetic vision of a hopeful future. But here we are. It is 2001. But there are no daily space shuttles to and from the moon. No grand wheeling space stations in low Earth orbit. And no colonies on Mars.
After the spectacular success of landing a man on the moon, Mars seemed like the next logical step. It is, after all, our nearest planetary neighbor. And long before Neil Armstrong stepped off the ladder of the Eagle onto the surface of the moon, Earth scientists had been struggling to solve the riddle of the red planet. Even with an expanding space program, all of our best efforts met with failure after failure. On October of 1960, the Russians launched 2 spacecraft, neither of which even reached Earth orbit. They tried again in 1962. This time, the craft reached orbit but died there. In November of the same year, the Soviets actually got Mars 1 on its way and proudly announced it would reach Mars in June of 1963. If in fact it made it, no one will ever know. 10 weeks before it was scheduled to arrive, the Soviets lost all contact.
After the problems the Russians had getting their probes to Mars, the American scientists started to joke among themselves about some great galactic ghoul that was preventing our missions from getting there too. But in November of 1964, the U.S. launched the Mariner spacecraft. But as it approached Mars, Mariner 3's camera shroud failed to open, making the camera useless.
The Soviets, seemingly unwilling to give up, launched another probe of their own in November of '64. Called Zond 2, it also disappeared into the void of space. After 5 years and 6 tries, Earth scientists were no closer to Mars than their best telescopes. Missions to Mars were in fact meeting with an unusually high failure rate. Then in July of 1965, Mariner 4 finally brought success by completing the first flyby within 6,000 miles of Mars. Mariner 4 returned 22 primitive television images of the red planet back to Earth. Had we at last outwitted the galactic ghoul? Apparently not. When the Soviets then attempted to actually land a probe on Mars, something astonishing happened.
Everything on the Mars probe seemed to be working just fine, and then it suddenly shut off.
Could there was something out there interfering with Earth's effort to reach Mars? Was Mars just too difficult for our technology? Or was it all just an incredible chain of coincidences? Completely overshadowed by the spectacular feat of landing a man on the moon, 1969 also saw 2 significant successes in the race to Mars. Mariner 6 and Mariner 7 both completed flybys returning over 200 images of the planet's surface. And in 1971, NASA successfully put Mariner 9 in orbit around Mars. The great galactic ghoul, it seems, had been defeated. Or had it? The Soviets, still trying to regain leadership in the space race, announced they were going to land on Mars. In 1971, they launched Mars 2 and Mars 3. Each of these probes carried a rover, a small remote-controlled vehicle designed to be deployed on the Martian surface after landing. Mars 2 flew into the teeth of a horrendous Martian dust storm and crashed. But Mars 3 landed and deployed its rover. The Russians can forever say they sent the first pictures back from the surface of Mars. But it was a short-lived triumph. Within 2 minutes, the rover transmitter went dead. The galactic ghoul was back in business. And in just a little over a decade, it would make itself felt with a vengeance. But in 1976, the American Viking program met with spectacular success. The probes, both on the surface and in orbit, began sending volumes of photographs back to Earth, including these haunting images. Is it possible this was something we weren't supposed to see?
Encouraged by the success of the Viking probe, the Soviet Union, with international cooperation, launched a set of satellites in 1988. Phobos 1 never even made it to the planet. At some point along the journey, it just simply vanished.
The 1988 Soviet probe of Phobos 2, the probe that was sent up to look at one of the moons of Mars, apparently encountered something very strange, of which the Soviets had a picture that did surface in the United States.
It started to transmit some pictures of a large elliptical shadow, and then it too shut off, never to be heard from again.
And 5 years later, the American space probe Mars Orbiter seems to have met the same fate. But what exactly did happen here? On March 26th, Phobos 2 sent back images that showed a long elliptical shadow. These images, so far as the international team knew, were the last images sent by Phobos 2. But 5 months later, British television did a special on the Phobos mission indicating there were other photographs the Russians had not released. These photographs, according to the report, showed an object which, in their words, should not have been there. Many researchers now believe the loss of so many Mars probes cannot be an accident. Could it be there has been a deliberate attack by someone or something near Mars that for whatever reason does not want to be photographed? Has this bizarre string of space disasters occurred because we caught a glimpse of something that we were not supposed to see? Did the Viking space probe present us with a mystery that is unsolvable? Perhaps there is something in those photographs that will help us solve the Martian puzzle. Could it be that there are structures on Mars that are not the work of natural forces? Is the government and its agencies telling us everything we need to know, or that we have a right to know? And why is NASA calling its latest probe 2001 a Mars Odyssey? Up until 1976, surface features of Mars had largely been the subject of conjecture. Some astronomers late in the 19th century supposed Mars was crisscrossed by a series of straight lines they called canals. And even as late as the mid-1950s, serious investigators manned telescopes in hopes of identifying large patches of green, seen and even photographed on the planet's surface. Alas, nothing of the sort could be confirmed. But in 1976, when the unmanned Viking space probe began sending back hundreds of images of the Mars surface, it appeared that at last the Martian mystery would be solved. Unexpectedly, the exact opposite was true. When the photographs from orbit being transmitted back to Earth began to be analyzed, this surface feature in an area of the planet designated Cydonia suddenly caught the attention of people the world over.
Their original reaction was that it was a trick of chance sunlighting. Mars is certainly not capable of supporting life as we know it, intelligent life as we know it. So the idea of this being a creation of intelligence was not even considered by NASA. Although when they first spotted the image, they labeled that frame head.
Fortunately, that wasn't the end of the matter. Richard C. Hoagland, a former science advisor to both NBC and CBS, and consultant to NASA and the Goddard Space Flight Center, among many other achievements, took a personal interest in the enigmatic object.
During that process, Viking introduced us to the real Mars in the summer of '76. As the photographs came back from Mars and into the computers at JPL, and then to those of us gathered in JPL's auditorium to witness the first landing of an unmanned spacecraft on the planet Mars. One of those photographs showed a mile-long, 1,500-foot-high mesa, shaped like a humanoid face. It simply did not belong. It cried out for explanation. if only for reassurance that it did not belong on Mars.
Two image analysis experts, Vincent DiPietro and Gregory Molinar, also found the Cydonia photograph captivating. They undertook the colossal task of discovering what the strange picture really showed.
At first, they just enlarged the photo and considered there was nothing there at all. So Vincent DiPietro and I designed a computer program to enhance the image in much more detail than NASA had done.
Even though their new program resulted in images as convincing as these, NASA apparently continued to insist that the image was nothing more than a trick of lighting. NASA also said that Viking had photographed the same area from a different angle a few hours later, and that there was no face visible in the second photograph.
Then we went through the archives to see if there was any other satellite passes over that same area. NASA said there wasn't at first, and we looked through their archives and found one. And there, just as before, there was a face with a higher sun angle, showing more detail than before, even to the amount of showing teeth in the mouth and pupils in the eyes. We were very impressed.
Now there were two photographs of the head. Was this proof that the image was constructed by intelligent beings? Does this second photograph, long officially denied by NASA, finally solve the mystery? Or is it only the beginning of an even larger puzzle? A puzzle that has one of its most important pieces found here on Earth. These two photographs, identified by their NASA frame numbers, 35A72, orbit 35, camera A, frame 72, and 70A13, also contain considerable detail about the surrounding area, revealing several other images that investigators found as exciting as the mysterious fate.
About 10 miles away from the face is a couple of pyramids, and the strange thing about those pyramids is they're very regular shape, and in the corner of each corner there appears to be a buttress, and on close examination the buttress itself is pyramid shaped. This would be really, really remarkable for this to be a natural formation.
The pyramid is now called the D&M Pyramid, after its discoverers DiPietro and Molinar. Could it be that we were actually beginning to see genuine scientific proof that an intelligent race of beings actually lived on the planet Mars? Since the time of that discovery, science advisor and investigator Richard Hoagland has worked tirelessly to discover the whole truth about the mysterious Cydonia region.
A member of our team at that time, Dr. Mark Carlotto, decided to use a three-dimensional modeling technique to image the face in 3D. This proved, once and for all, that in fact this was a 1,500-foot-high, mile-long sculpture of a humanoid face.
But isn't it still possible that all of these intriguing shapes are really nothing more than accidents of nature? That the researchers are simply letting their imaginations run away with them? Perhaps. Nevertheless, many intriguing questions are raised by the odd similarity between the image from the planet Mars and this ancient structure here on Earth. The most fascinating question being, does this image on the surface of another planet provide important clues to the origins of ancient structures, if not ancient civilizations, on our world? Richard Hoagland's research team may have uncovered proof that one of our oldest relics was not built at the time nor by the people to whom it is routinely attributed.
As I began consulting various references and looking into books and talking with colleagues about the various aspects of the project, such as a sketch done by Jim Shannon, one of our early artists, we began to realize that anthropologically there was something profound about this structure.
Could the resemblance between the face at Cydonia and the Sphinx at Giza be just a mere coincidence? If not, does it prove once and for all that these great monuments on Earth were in fact built by men with a knowledge of its much larger cousin on the planet Mars? And if so, how?
Did the Egyptians, in fact, as we know them, create this effigy, the Great Sphinx of Egypt?
A detailed 1991 survey by a team of eminent geologists and geophysicists headed by Dr. Robert Schoch of Boston University has now determined that the Great Sphinx was built around 5000 BC. rather than 2500 BC as previously thought. Dr. Schock contends that the Sphinx actually suffered water damage from fierce flooding in the area more than 2,500 years before the first Egyptian kingdom came into existence.
That is, the Sphinx appears to be much, much more heavily weathered than we have any right to expect from only, quote, 5,000 years of desert weathering. The kind of weathering we see on the Sphinx is best explained by the action of running water. You need rain to get that degree of erosion, 12 feet of it in some places, and it hasn't rained like that in Egypt for perhaps 10 to maybe 15 or 20,000 years. Now that raises a wonderful problem, because this means that we are looking, probably, at a monumental work of art, created at a time when nobody else on planet Earth was capable of doing anything like that. There's no other contemporary civilization to pin it on. So, who did it?
Could it be that both of these ancient sculptures share a common heritage? That the Sphinx was built by literal descendants of those who created the amazing face on Mars long ago? Who or what is the face intended to represent? Has NASA stepped up efforts to rephotograph the Cydonia Plain? Or has the galactic ghoul taken over once again? The year 2001 was supposed to be the year of great discovery. Has technology kept pace with the dream? $1 billion was poured into a satellite called the Mars Observer. Will it give us the answers? It's been over 30 years since the United States accomplished the outstanding feat of landing a man on the moon. But for some as yet unknown reason, American manned space exploration has been all but junked. Instead of returning to the moon and building bases or going on to Mars to find what's there, we're confined to low Earth orbit, operating essentially a trucking company called the Shuttle, while an entire solar system beckons. How could the futurists have been so wrong? In the same 30 years, technology has taken us from this to this. Communication technology has done away with the tether, while computers have opened up undreamed of possibilities, putting computer power at virtually everyone's fingertips. But today's space program uses essentially the same technology developed for the Apollo program 30 years ago.
NASA's Cydonia discovery in '76, and its now obvious 20-year suppression, had a profound, if negative, influence on the direction, if not the pace, of the entire space program. To those behind the program, the presence of a human face on the surface of a nearby planet immediately seemed to imply the chilling scene of alien intervention.
Could that be the answer? Was the development of space technology deliberately impeded for fear of the discovery of alien artifacts? Or had someone already decided the artifact had been found and they were simply implementing policy? Clear back in 1959, NASA had commissioned a study by the prestigious Brookings Institute titled innocuously, Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Given all the activities surrounding the sudden appearance of dozens of UFO sightings over the preceding 10 years, it is perhaps not too surprising that this study included a remarkable section for the Times entitled Implications of a Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life.
In this section of the 264-page document, Brookings experts advise NASA that, quote, cosmologists and astronomers think it quite likely that there is intelligent life in many solar systems, and astonishingly concluded that, quote, artifacts left at some point in time by these life forms might possibly be discovered through our own space activities on the Moon, Mars, or Venus. They went on to point out, long before Arthur C. Clarke put words in the mouth of his futuristic space administrator, the grave potential for social dislocation and cultural shock should this be prematurely disclosed. In fact, they recommended strongly total suppression of this information.
But the questions still remain. Was this indeed an artifact or just an interesting anomaly? Hoagland and his team attacked the work with renewed vigor. Could there be some clue in the fact that the Sphinx was a combination of man and lion? Or could there be an answer in the complex geometry the Mars mission had begun to develop around the other structures nearby? Or could it be both?
Maybe there's a connection. Maybe the face at Cydonia is half man, half something else.
First, they copied the left half of the Cydonia head, made a mirror image of it, and pasted it onto the other side. The results were interesting but inconclusive. However, when he tried the same thing with the right half, flipped it over, and matched it up on the left side, the result was a clear image of a lion. Are these merely strange optical illusions? Or are they the key to understanding the real truth about the history of Mars? Surely it's still possible that mere coincidence could account for the seemingly mysterious connection between Earth and Mars. What was needed was some sort of scientific proof.
Here in southwest England, the man-made mountain of Silbury Hill has loomed over the horizon since time immemorial. Nearby is Avebury, another megalithic monument believed to be thousands of years old, with an eroding earthen wall preserving an inner circle of partially preserved ancient standing stones. The area also contains an amazing connection to the structures at Cydonia. The connection here was determined not by simple observation or even supposition, but was founded on the plain facts of geometry. The question was, what if these ancient monuments in England corresponded in size, shape, and dimension to a set of geometric features on a plane called Cydonia? What if Avebury Circle in England was in fact intended to represent, to be an analog of the crater at Cydonia, and Silbury Hill, a few miles to the south, came to represent the Tholus at Cydonia on Mars? The angles and positions of these ancient features, including where the cliff would be, where the tetrahedral pyramid seems to lie, and the specific angle interconnecting them both, the infamous 19.5, all seem to match, including the very size of Silbury Hill in terms of its exterior moat with reference to the Tholus. It was at this point that we began to worry less about the ultimate reality of the face on Mars and more about the meaning and the message of Cydonia.
But could there be more to this message than even Hoagland and his team imagined? More than just a scientific message? Could it be that the pyramids of Egypt and the pyramids of Cydonia, potentially stemming from a common heritage, share a common biblical tribute to the creator of the universe?
We use typology, which is the study of symbols and their meaning in biblical scripture, to understand what's on the surface of Mars and Cydonia. We found that the entire Cydonia complex relates to the prophecies in the Old and the New Testament of the first and the second coming of Christ. The Cydonia architecture is a geometric representation of scripture. The face represents Jesus, and the giant hill, or the Tholus, is an altar to God. The Tholus was built to the exact specifications that God gave to Moses in the book of Exodus. The Cydonia builders obviously knew that God in the future would dwell with men in human form on the earth. And who were the inhabitants of Mars? Our studies have shown that it was a civilization of pre-rebellion angels who lived on Mars before the creation of human beings on the earth. This civilization used their monuments to give glory to God, their creator. The builders of the monuments, who once followed God, their creator, were destroyed for the rebellion against him. We also see in the destruction of the monuments of Mars by a great cataclysm, a precursor of what may happen on the earth in the future.
Whether or not these biblical references are meaningful, of course, or whether Hoagland's geometry is valid, depends entirely on being able to prove the Martian monuments are truly artifacts. And NASA, despite the implications of a bona fide discovery, was curiously indifferent to finding proof, even though they apparently had the means for over 20 years. On September 25, 1992, the most sophisticated space probe of its kind was launched into outer space. The Mars Observer was designed to orbit, photograph, and carefully study the red planet in greater detail than ever before. Was the extensive work done by Hoagland and his Mars mission team sufficiently intriguing to convince NASA to re-photograph the face after more than 20 years? Not by a long shot. The space agency, in fact, did something completely unprecedented. Since the first television cameras were sent on space missions in the mid-1960s, NASA has always shared its video images with the world. But just before the launch of the Mars Observer, NASA announced that for the first time ever, it would not allow any images to be broadcast live on television. Why? Why would the National Space Agency suddenly change a policy that had stood for nearly 40 years? Could it be that there was more at work here than the fabled galactic ghoul? Had NASA violated one of its oldest and most rigid protocols? By the time Mars Observer nearly reached orbit, the heated, sometimes bitter controversy over the face on Mars had been ongoing for almost 20 long years. If these discoveries truly were proof that there once was intelligent life on another world, didn't it seem reasonable to try and get a closer look at Cydonia? Mars Observer would have done exactly that. But instead, the arrival turned into a bizarre puzzle. On August 22nd, it was announced that the Mars Observer had disappeared 14 hours earlier. According to the official announcement, contact had been lost at 6 p.m. Pacific time the previous evening. For some inexplicable reason, NASA had postponed the announcement for 14 hours.
The timing of the announcement was odd enough, but things just got stranger and stranger. For the first time in NASA's history, its technicians had deliberately instructed the spacecraft to turn the telemetry off. So when the accident occurred, there was literally no downlink back to ground control, so the engineers could ever reconstruct what exactly occurred.
There are those who believe that whoever or whatever it is that doesn't want us to get a closer look at the red planet is not in outer space, but here on Earth.
The Mars Observer mission may have been doomed before it even left the ground. Hurricane Andrew hit the coast of Florida just about the time the Mars Observer was being prepared for launch. Even though it had been prepared for such an onslaught, technicians checked the probe to make sure that it had not been damaged by the storm. The nitrogen system was equipped with special filters to prevent such dust and debris from being taken into the system, and the cameras were in a separate compartment. In spite of this, bits of paper and dust and debris was found in both compartments. It looked as though someone had swept the floor and dumped the results into the compartments. It's unlikely that Hurricane Andrew would have been responsible for all of this.
But why would anyone want to sabotage a photographic mission to Mars? What is there about our neighboring planet that someone doesn't want us to see? What is the secret they're trying to protect? Given the paranoia of the Brookings report, Richard Hoagland suggests several possibilities.
One is that we had a previous high-tech civilization here on Earth, which went to Mars, built some stuff, and then collapsed. And only now are we rediscovering our heritage. A second hypothesis is that someone else, someone from far away, hundreds or even thousands of light years from the solar system, came to this system, came to Mars, built a civilization, and left an artifact in the form of a proto-human being, so that we would know, thousands of years down the line, that they, in fact, had touched us here on Earth. Someday we may discover that, in fact, we are the Martians.
Assuming for the moment that there could have been a flourishing race on Mars at some time in the distant past, why would they bother to build such huge monuments?
Cydonia was probably constructed to communicate something very fundamental. In fact, from the geometry we found, we believe it was designed to communicate a whole new physics, a grand unified field theory, as it were, given to us, communicated even by the Viking photographs, by the geometric layout of the structures.
Researchers now believe that the key to understanding the entire Cydonia complex may lie in the geometry of the D&M pyramid, in the size, shape, and position of the massive structure. Hoagland's colleague at the Defense Mapping Agency, Errol Torin, successfully deduced this key object's internal geometry and found it all came down to 19.5 degrees.
Why 19.5? On every major or minor planet that NASA has flown by, photographed, or mapped in the last 30 years, there appears to be a major disturbance located just about 19.5 degrees north or south.
The Great Red Spot on the planet Jupiter has been viewed as essentially a giant cyclone, primarily presumed to be an atmospheric storm larger than the entire planet Earth that continues to churn for over 300 years of observation at 19.5 degrees south. According to Hoagland, on every planet in our solar system, there seems to be some kind of major geological or atmospheric disturbance at 19.5 degrees north or south, including our own gigantic volcano, Mauna Loa, raging up from the center of the Earth in the Hawaiian Islands at 19.5 degrees north. Does this suggest that the builders of the D&M Pyramid recorded in its structure a key to the inner nature of every planet in our system, including our own? Could it be there is a reason for leaving the number 19.5 encrypted in a pyramid?
This is a four-sided, four-cornered figure known for thousands of years as a tetrahedron. If you put this structure inside a sphere, such as a planet, it predicts via a 100-year-old mathematical theory some remarkable physical properties.
Hoagland claims that if you place a perfect tetrahedron or pyramid within a sphere, such as a planet, so that one tip is at the north or south pole, the other tips will fall at the latitude of 19.5 degrees, the same as the angles discovered in the D&M Pyramid.
19.5 is a significant number in the Bible. It symbolizes faith. In biblical numerics, 19 is associated with the most faithful people and the greatest promises in the Bible. The 0.5 of this number represents grace and hope.
And that is precisely what Hoagland and his associates have continued to do. Hope. So far as anyone knows, the Mars observer was never heard from again. And there were two more notches to the credit of the galactic ghoul, as a Mars orbiter and the Mars polar lander both failed in 1999. But there was a probe that did make it into orbit, the Mars Global Surveyor.
We thought our hopes would finally bear fruit in 1998 with a NASA JPL agreement to finally reimage the face using this incredibly sophisticated camera flying on the Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft. Things truly seemed to be coming together. In 1996, NASA had announced the possible discovery of ancient life in a piece of rock that had come all the way from Mars. Finally, on the 5th of April 1998, after almost a quarter of a century of waiting, we got from Mars Global Surveyor what should have been an exquisite, much higher resolution image of the face on Mars. Unfortunately, after JPL got through enhancing what came to be known in some circles as the cat box image, there was nothing left to see, which was obviously their intent all along.
As you might suspect, NASA and JPL were not the only imaging experts to review the 1998 photographs.
The image that JPL released to the media in 1998 is not at all a faithful representation of even the raw data, let alone what is actually there. Image processing experts who have now treated the image properly have shown that it does indeed look very much like a hominid face. When we got the original image of the face in 1976, there was always the possibility that it was just a trick of light and shadow or something that was an accident of nature. When we got the high-resolution image, to our amazement, all of the secondary facial features were there too. Eyebrow, irises, nostrils, and lips with the correct size, shape, location, and orientation to be portrayals of a humanoid face. The odds against each of those things happening by accident range from 1 in 10 to 1 in 10,000. When you put them all together, the odds against all of them being accidents of nature are 100 billion to 1. Based on the results of the test, the object is artificial beyond a reasonable doubt.
The Mars Global Surveyor went into orbit in late 1997, and since has been sending back literally tens of thousands of exquisite pictures of all of Mars. But Malin Scientific and Dr. Malin himself, who have the chief contract for the camera, have actually only been releasing these pictures in dribs and drabs, spaced out over several months and even years. Until Arizona Senator John McCain let NASA know in no uncertain terms that there would be a day of reckoning if in fact it were proven that the agency had deliberately withheld vital information either from the Congress or from the American taxpayer. Suddenly, without warning, JPL released 9 new Cydonia images, some as much as 2 years old. Eventually, 60,000 new images of Mars were dramatically released, and on those, some breathtaking discoveries have now begun to quietly unfold. For instance, perched on a mile-high cliff in the Martian equivalent of the Grand Canyon, Valles Marineris, there is something which gives the impression of being the equivalent of a Martian flying saucer. As you can see, this is a distinct oval. In fact, it's a convex oval with the sun coming from this direction, the shadowed side here, a fluted rim hanging several hundred feet over this very steep vertical cliff a mile above the valley floor. If you look at the image on the right, you can actually see that in addition to it being oval, it has a pointed front. And on the front, there are windows. In the back, with very interesting symmetry configuration, there appear to be the engines. In June of 2000, we discovered potentially our most extraordinary artifact, this mile-long, several hundred-foot-wide structure with translucent exterior, a brilliant sun glint, and evenly spaced ribs that looks for all the world like an artificially constructed glass tunnel, which some have termed, like Arthur Clarke, a glass worm on the surface of a planet where it has, again, no business being. We have over a mile-long, curvilinear, convex structure with these extraordinary ribs that appear to be some kind of structural support. And right in the middle, there's a brilliant sun glint and a darker shadow, indicating in the model that this is a constructed object, that maybe it's a transportation tube. And this little thing, which actually is several hundred feet wide on the scale of the photograph, is perhaps a car, trapped in the middle of the tube when whatever disaster hit Mars and broke the tube at this point hit the planet. It's sometimes hard to gauge what's going on Mars from a two-dimensional photograph, so what we did was go to one of our Enterprise mission colleagues, Chris Joseph, and ask him to submit this image to a shape from shading algorithm. What that allows us to do is to recreate a three-dimensional construction of the two-dimensional form. And what we clearly see is an undulating glass-like tunnel with a sharp break at the position of the car, continuing on down the valley, as one would expect of a greatly eroded ancient artificial structure on the planet Mars. Because this is such a controversial discovery, what we did was what you do in any science, go to another opinion. So we got Kinthea and Fred Torres to generate a moving animated diagram of the same structure using the same shape from shading algorithm. And what you see here is a pan around this little valley and then the tube. And if you look carefully over here, you can see that there's a definite 3D structure to this object with regular spaced ribbing high above the valley floor. Whatever these are, they are not sand dunes. They appear to be structural components of a tube. And as we continue to pan down this valley, which is created by some unknown geological process long after this tube was ever built, you can see that these ribs are on the edges of the valley, not along the floor, something again that sand dunes just don't do. So what we seem to be seeing is the most extraordinary Mars surveyor find, namely a huge work of megalithic engineering lying on an ancient Martian plain. The great mystery at this point seems to be if the Enterprise mission and its colleagues can find all this and so much more, then why can't NASA? Or is there something more? Is it possible that they have seen what we have seen and also understand what's really there, but have a reason to keep silent?
Is this face just a natural formation, or was it constructed by some long-lost civilization? And what of the pyramids of Mars? Are they the ancestors of the pyramids of Egypt, or just neatly shaped piles of Martian soil? Can it be that the perfect geometric precision found in these surface features is just a series of bizarre coincidences? Are we up to the task of finding out?
For 33 years, ever since the epic journeys of Apollo, we have essentially been marking time. 30 years marks the span of time between Charles Lindbergh's epic transatlantic journey and the first orbit of the Earth by Sputnik. Following that curve, by now, we should have inherited the solar system.
Is it possible that the controversy of the past 2 decades was contrived, just as Brookings suggested, to prepare us for the impact of knowledge beyond our current understanding? If the remarkable achievements of the Mars Global Surveyor bring about a renewed interest in the marvels of the cosmos in which we live, will future generations look back on 2001 as we looked forward to it, as the year of discovery?